Good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR and welcome back to another video. Legendary Pokemon, the pinnacle of all Pokemon, the strongest of the strong, at least on paper. Some of these guys are actually quite bad, believe it or not. And I don't mean bad as in, man, I just woke up and decided I really don't like Regigigas today. I mean like he's objectively terrible to use in almost any context. And so today, through the lens of both VGC and competitive singles, I'm going to be analyzing every region to find each one's worst competitive legendary Pokemon. Let's get into it. For Generation 1, more often than not, the worst legendary is almost always Articuno. Now, this may be hard to believe for some of you who recently tuned into the 2023 World Championships, and may have seen competitor Patrick Donegan using his favorite Pokemon Articuno to great success. Though even he would probably admit it's a bit of a cheesy strategy, as it involved taking advantage of both Bright Powder and Snow Cloak to make Articuno nearly unhittable, while whipping up more blizzards than a Dairy Queen employee. RNG willing, this actually works pretty well, but it's definitely not without its counters. Not to mention, its Galarian counterpart is also a pretty decent upgrade thanks to its much better Psychic typing and the abundance of viable moves it learns. But even so, Galarian Moltres is typically the most popular of the trio in competitive play. Don't worry, I didn't forget about Cantonian Zapdos. It's just so good in both formats that it's not even in this discussion. What ultimately kills Articuno is the singles metagame, where it's just never been all that good. Outside of Gen 1, which we can write off due to all the jank mechanics at work. Pretty much ever since the introduction of Stealth Rocks in Gen 4, Articuno has been a no-show in singles. But it was only a matter of time before its horrible ice-flying type combination caught up with it. Not to mention, it's always had a pretty subpar move pool to choose from, as it hardly learns any good non-ice type moves. But who knows, with the recent buff to Snow, maybe Articuno can continue to carve out its own niche in the VGC format. Over the course of 27 years, this is definitely the best this Pokemon has ever looked, so maybe the future is brighter than you'd think. For Generation 2, the worst legendary is almost certainly Entei. All the way through Gen 5, Entei suffered from stats that just didn't mesh with its move pool. It kinda had a case of Flareon syndrome, where it had exceptionally high physical attack, but not many good moves that could take advantage of it. X and Y would grant Entei with the significant buff it was looking for though, as it now shares Sacred Fire with Ho-Oh, which, yes, is surprisingly a physical attack. But moving into Gen 7 and 8, Entei would once again fall off as its stats and other moves simply pale in comparison to better Fire-type attackers. Compared to its brethren, Raikou has always been blessed with a remarkably good special move pool, allowing it to be at least somewhat relevant every generation, and Suicune has the benefit of being a bulky water type, which is an archetype that never goes out of style. In singles, Entei is the only one of the trio to never reach the top tier, and in VGC it was only relevant on teams twice in 2015 and 2022, whereas the other beasts have been far more common throughout history. But if you thought that was bad, then buckle up, because Gen 3 is presenting us with far worse candidates. The Regis. All of them. Well, at least Registeel in singles has shown some potential over the years, but I feel like that's literally just because it's a steel type. So this competition really comes down to Regirock and Regice. Regirock is not good by any means, but at least it learns Stealth Rock, and has some decent offensive moves, and a typing that lets it resist some common low-tier threats, and apparently it once got 5th place at an Australian Regional in 2018, which may only be one result, but it's one more than the other two have. But Regice? Man, I can't think of nearly anything good to say. Like Articuno, it's tethered to Ice, arguably the worst defensive type in the game, which is not great when your whole purpose in life is to be a tank. It barely has any reliable moves, both offense-based or support. In fact, this Pokemon has been untiered in singles since the end of Generation 6. That's nearly a decade of this Pokemon seeing zero usage on the ladder. Who could have created such a horrible thing? Well, the answer is simple. The only legendary that's debatably worse than Regice, and our pick for Gen 4. Regigigas. Although that narrative may have slightly changed over the past few years, as Regigigas was actually repped on a few successful VGC teams during the Sword and Shield era. Of course with some much needed assistance from its good pal Galarian Weezing, but hey, it's enough for it to be the second most represented Regi ever in VGC, which good lord is a bar so low I'm not even sure Johto can walk under it. And in singles, I probably don't need to say it, but yeah, this Pokemon is virtually unusable aside from very niche support roles. Unfortunately, basically nothing gets it out of slow start in that format. But anyway, since I can't elaborate much more on this one besides lol slow start, why don't we pick a second worst legendary from Gen 4? And for that, I'm going with Mesprit. Mesprit is meant to be a middle ground pick between the more support-based Uxie and the more offense-based Azelf, but that unfortunately just means it excels in neither. In recent years, this Pokemon has gone back and forth with Uxie as the worst of the trio. Uxie is regrettably a case of a bulky Pokemon with below average speed and no access to recovery, so it gets worn down quite easily. But looking at broader history, Uxie typically sits at least one tier above Mesprit every generation, though that gap is certainly closing. Hi, are you enjoying the video? Good, then why not go ahead and subscribe? That way you'll always see my new videos when they come out and you'll make me happy. Please, I need dopamine right now, this is serious. In Gen 5, the bar is raised far higher than it was the previous 2 generations, as pretty much all the legends here are usable in some fashion. But there is one who notably sits a bit lower, Virizion. The issue with Virizion is that it's set up to be a typical glass cannon sweeper, but with a surprisingly low base 90 attack. Which I know isn't that low, but this is a sword of justice we're talking about. It pretty much needs to set up Swords Dance in order to unlock its full potential. And even then, its move pool leaves a lot to be desired, as it can still be walled out by many common Pokemon. Not to mention, Grass Fighting does leave a lot of gaps in its defense that even a base 129 special defense stat can't fully account for. However, Virizion was actually quite common in the VGC meta, getting respectable results in 2013, 2015, and 2018. While it still didn't have the usage or results of its brother Terrakion, it did notably outpace Cobalion, who has almost never been seen on any noteworthy VGC teams. So you could make an argument that Cobalion is the worst of the trio, but it does seem like as time has gone on, the meta has been much less forgiving to Virizion than Cobalion. Now for Gen 6, this is definitely our highest bar generation, with the smallest pool of 3 legendaries, but all 3 of them are Ubers in the singles meta. Though if you asked this question a few years ago, the answer would have easily been Zygarde. It's just that Power Construct turns this Pokemon into a 2-phase boss fight, and he has more than enough bulk to set up a Dragon Dance or 2 while still in its 50% form. Yveltal is also one of the most dominant legendaries across the board thanks to its amazing typing, dark aura, the ability to heal itself, and so much more. In Sword and Shield, this was the #1 most used Pokemon in the Ubers tier, and it was used on a whopping 74 teams that got results in the 2022 VGC circuit. Surely we can rule out Xerneas too, right? Geomancy is easily one of the most broken moves ever made when combined with Power Herb, and this Pokemon absolutely dominated the metagame whenever it was legal. It's been on hundreds of teams over the course of a handful of years. Some would even say this Pokemon ruined VGC for a time, but it did remarkably fall off during the Sword and Shield era. Mostly because Zacian existed, and also Max Steel Spike was one of the most commonly ran Dynamax attacks. And, well, that's the gist of it. So in a post-Zacian era, Xerneas is probably the worst of the 3. But taking their entire histories into account, it's probably Zygarde. Even with Power Construct, this Pokemon was never that prevalent in VGC. Unlike Xerneas and Yveltal, which have been 2 of the most popular Pokemon around for many years. And while Zygarde Complete Form is a force to be reckoned with in singles, it's definitely not without its many checks and counters. And you can always get lucky with a well-timed Ice Beam to just KO it before it even activates its complete form. So while this was a remarkably tight race, I'm gonna have to give the worst legendary dishonor to Zygarde for this gen. In Gen 7, we have another cop-out similar to Gen 4. Of course, Cosmog and Cosmoem, the literal babies that they are with 0 attacking moves, are objectively the worst legendaries ever made. And we don't need to talk much else about them. Even if we go up a rung, Type Null and its evolution Silvally are pretty bad in their own rights. Silvally essentially has a worse version of multi-type as an ability, as RKS system requires it to give up a held item and essentially its ability, all for the low value of having a type that isn't normal. On top of that, this Pokemon has no standout stats. It's not remarkably fast, it can't tank that well, it can't hit that hard, it's just mediocre in all areas. In fact, of its 18 forms, only the Fairy, Ghost, Ground, and Steel versions get any online usage at all. The other 14 may as well not even exist. Despite that though, this Pokemon did see a light amount of usage in VGC in the 2017 and 2020 formats. I don't know what they saw in this Pokemon, but hey, it worked for a few people, which is more than I can say about some legendaries. The Regis. But in a generation that includes the Tapus, Ultra Necrozma, and so much more, a few good teams isn't enough to pass. Gen 8 is kinda similar. I feel like we just shouldn't count Kubfu since it isn't fully evolved, and Urshifu is more than destructive. Calyrex and the Steeds are a bit hard to judge, well, mostly Calyrex and Glastrier because apart they're horrible, but together they're broken. And Spectrier is just always broken, so don't worry about him. But I guess if you count these two as individual Pokemon and disregard the Raiden form, they are probably this gen's worst legendary Pokemon, with Calyrex just being the straight up worst. Look at these stats, my man is built like a slightly thick Glalie. But if we do count Ice Rider, then the next worst legendary from this gen is most certainly Regidrago. While its sibling Regieleki went on to finally do the Regi family justice, graduating from college, settling down with a nice Incineroar lead, nearly winning Worlds, and getting banned incredibly fast from Gen 9 singles, Regidrago did none of that. This Pokemon is virtually unused in all of VGC. It has a very poor presence in singles, albeit not as poor as the previous 4 Regis, but nowhere near where Aleki sits. Like the other bulkier Regis, it's just not equipped with the tools to be a good support Pokemon, and while it can set up to be a decent late game sweeper, there's a lot of obstacles you'll need to remove first, since its offensive move pool leaves a lot to be desired. And for Gen 9, once again, the bar is raised sky high. Koraidon and Miraidon haven't been legalized in VGC yet, but I'm sure once they are, they'll be two of the most dominant Pokemon around. Anything that fast that also sets up free sunlight or electric terrain for fellow Paradox Pokemon is going to be broken. And you can take that to the bank. So before the DLC comes out, we have to turn our attention to the 4 Ruin Pokemon, who are all really good. But one does notably lag behind his brethren, and that's, get your reactions ready, Wo-Chien. Is Wo-Chien bad? No, not at all. It's just in a family with 3 of the most oppressive Pokemon ever introduced. To use the family analogy again, it's not like Wo-Chien dropped out of high school and works at McDonald's or anything. He has a well-paying 9-to-5 job with a nice 2-story house, maybe has a nice car he drives on the weekends. But his 3 brothers are millionaires, and that's just the way it is. Sometimes you're born privileged, and sometimes you're born a grass type. It happens. But that is every generation's worst legendary Pokemon, at least so far. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos just like this one. I'll see you guys next time.